You guys, has anyone ever told you like you're too smart for your own good? And have you ever thought about what that actually meant or means? Like, were they just jealous? So I had a friend say that to me once, and at the time I didn't think much of it. It did feel like a backhanded compliment, and but I also knew, like, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not true. But here's the thing about what it actually means. It's basically referring to being in a mental trap. You know, you are so smart, your account is so good, your framework is so tight, airtight arguments that you can't get out of it. Because face it, getting out of it would have to mean that you're wrong in some way, that you're wrong about something, that you're wrong about 5% maybe. And just as we can have like autoimmune diseases of our physical body, this happens on the intellectual and mental level as well. There's nothing wrong with your intelligence. It's working very efficiently and logically, but it's like pointed at the wrong things. So instead of like solving problems for you and like helping you navigate the world in accordance with your own goals, it's actually a form of self-sabotage, because it ends up giving you all these reasons why you can't, why that's not possible, why this is not possible, why things are the way they are. And so this problem can show up in, I used to think of it as like the parallel parking problem. Like you may feel like, you may tell yourself things like, well, I can't do A yet because I need B, but I can't do B yet because I need C, and I can't do C because of D, and so on. And so you never feel like you can move very forward or backward in any one direction very much. But like the positive side of this is that it's such an easy problem to identify, and it's just so obviously the ego at work, clutching and grasping the intellectual ego, holding you in place basically in a way that makes you right, makes the ego right, because the ego is always right. It has to be. And that can ultimately end up just keeping you stuck. And we know sometimes we like it. We like feeling stuck. The ego likes feeling stuck because it can remain where it is. It can remain comfortable. You may have a nice little golden cage you can sit in and, whatever you like to do in that cage. What this really is, it's about having a closed versus an open system. You want your mind to be an open system. You need to connect with the world. A closed mind, literally, a closed system is what keeps you stuck. And no light gets in. You can't find an opening. You can't find that like extra inch so you can like actually get out of the parallel park. And so there's two things you can do in this situation. Number one, you have to allow for the possibility that somewhere you're wrong. Maybe, if it's, you can allow yourself, I'm probably at least 5% wrong somewhere in here. And that 5% can become an opening through which, this is part two, you can allow yourself to be surprised by something in the outside world. So this is in cases where it may be a really extreme type of like parallel parking, I'm stuck kind of situation. But allowing yourself to be surprised by something is the same thing as allowing that, tell yourself there's at least 5% that you don't know about. Create that 5% opening in your system so that some light can get in, some surprise can get in, some acknowledgement that you don't actually know everything. And it's simple, that's what creates the open system. And gradually, if you really lean into that open space, you can get unstuck from, the corner that your mind has basically painted you into. Now, this isn't to blame you for whatever your circumstances may be, because they're very real. You've had real reactions. You aren't crazy. You aren't, perceiving imaginary things. But perhaps because of some other injury that was triggered, your ego has stepped in to kind of create this like super tight, airtight, rational edifice, and it's just got you locked in. Like you've practiced your story long enough. You don't need any more practice. You want to start practicing something that you know absolutely nothing about. Maybe you need to be really deliberate and deliberately choose something that just seems like so 180 degrees out of your normal jurisdiction. Go with that. Go with what works. Other ideas for ways out of this are to realize that language has its limitations in the sense that there's always more behind language, and the rational apparatus of our mind it's not entirely language based. Like, the medium of thought is not primarily language necessarily, but it does kind of like cleave very naturally into that medium. Like, they fit together very well. It's a logical apparatus. That's the part that we're talking about here. So if you can, you find a way to like get beyond language, to get beyond words, because it's the logic of our linguistic apparatus that's the same logic that you're using, and it's keeping you stuck. Now, I just want to emphasize, like, I'm not saying this to core about language and logic in general. I'm only talking about when the toxic shadow, when you like start to like the autoimmune type of dysfunctional aspect of our logical apparatus, when we use it against ourselves instead of adapting ourselves better for how we want to move through the world. And then more on like the emotional level, there's two kinds of like strategies you can use to kind of like move yourself out of this stuck place and like move yourself more into an open system. And the first, I've talked about this, is maybe harder to access depending on the level that you're at, but if you can generate self-compassion and self-forgiveness for where you've been. But first, and maybe more direct, is if you can find a way to do something that you're really afraid of, in the sense of like chipping away at something that has held you back because you've been afraid of it, you've pushed it aside, or you've avoided it. And if you can really start chipping away at that kind of like, that really turns a lot of wheels in a new direction, because you can see yourself literally making progress on an area that you were avoiding, and that can create a lot of momentum in unexpected ways for you. And in that sense, fear is really this kind of like threshold between us and the way we can show up in the world, because if you go back to some of the original definitions of stress by Hans Selye, it's really about, our own self-understanding of like whether we are an organism who is able to adapt to the world. Are we able to adapt to the demands placed on us? And if we start feeling like we're not, we want to shrink, we want to self-preserve, we pull back basically, and it can really spiral into a kind of learned helplessness, and then go down further into like some dangerous levels of cynicism. Like, one dangerous level of cynicism is when someone ceases to believe in language in the opposite direction, like in the toxic sense of, this doesn't mean anything, these are platitudes, this is a buzzword, this is, words no longer refer, words become, they're received as like mere instruments, mere tools, and so therefore any speaker is just naturally like always already kind of like manipulating. That's kind of the view that this perspective takes. And this is really the problem with representationalism. It's not an accurate paradigm for encountering the mind and mental phenomena, whereas a more embodied, I guess I would say, I want to talk more about like the connection with the world. So however, in which way we actually can connect what we do mentally with the world, which we are a part of. And wow, this sounds really obvious, right? But actually in many large areas and domains of science, it's not. Representationalism is really the dominant paradigm, and it just gets us into trouble. And if I can make a little side note about this, it's interesting to think about language in terms of information and semiotic exchange, really, and the realization that language itself is not even primarily about representation, but it's a function of information. It's a mode of information, or we can say one expression of information exchange. And so the function here is primarily to connect, not necessarily to represent at all. So through language, we connect with others. We're not always using language in a representational sense. It's not always a description. We make bids, we ask questions, we make bids for connection, we do all kinds of speech acts that have nothing to do with saying, you know, something is true or false about the world or me. And so the point here is just that, to go back to our topic of fear, if you can start moving on that level, that's how you can like reignite and renew a connection with the world around you in a way that language wasn't allowing you to do, because you were kind of stuck in some kind of representational dimension of language, in the sense of being stuck in the logical function. So the whole point here is just really to move out of representation, move out of logic, because it has that function, and jump into connection instead. So what can you connect with? What can you take actions on? Where can you create a new loop with the world, whatever your world is, wherever you are, right? Like, think about that book by, I think his name is Johann Hari. He wrote on depression, and his thesis was basically it's a condition of disconnection primarily, rather than some kind of like chemical set of states. It's about being disconnected. And so really this is just about the mind being the mind is excellent at creating like a simulacrum, at creating a representation, but the representation should come after the fact. It should come after the action, so to speak, so that, you know, you're prioritizing connection, you're prioritizing acting in the world, and then you use representations in order to facilitate that, to optimize that, rather than the other way around, which is when you start to like paint yourself into a corner. So let me know if this resonates, or if it raises new questions for you that like I haven't addressed, or clarifications that would be helpful. Like, what would you add to this? Cynicism is very different from having a realist approach, or from things even like complaining and, you know, mounting real complaints. It's not, the opposite isn't like a blind optimism or a kind of like denial about the state of anything, but cynicism is really tipped in the toxic direction. And if anything, cynicism will just like enable the status quo. So if you need like one takeaway about cynicism, is just to know like how low down it is, below, like, you know, it prevents any kind of taking action, and it's really an enabler of the status quo. Another way I might say it is that cynicism is not really even a form of intelligence at all, whereas a realist attitude is, because you can still take action. You know, you have like an open connection to the way things really are in the world, and in a sense where you can still take action, and you are taking actions, whereas in cynicism you're not. So the function of intelligence has really, you know, atrophied in this state. That's what I would say. But like, most of all, don't use cynicism on yourself. At least like create some boundaries. Like, if you want to use cynicism, know where you're applying it, but like don't subject yourself to that. Don't paint yourself into a corner. Like, of all things, like, you deserve that for yourself. Don't give up on yourself. Don't keep yourself on intellectual life support that way. You need to risk again. You need to get your heart involved again. So what this amounts to is just stepping out and forming a brand new relationship with the world somewhere. Something unexpected, something you wouldn't normally do, something you were afraid to do, but just making a new connection, reaching out again, and creating a new opening in that like massive system of representation that you've been working on. So I hope this helps. Thanks for watching. Let me know, and we'll keep talking.